Chapter 235 of Four Knights of the Apocalypse not only gave us the actual full-on reveal that the Knights of the Holy Grail are not just the children of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, but the future versions of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse as kids. And not only was that a pretty wild reveal, we now have the possibility of basically going for a literal either Future Trunks multi-timeline shenanigan thing or X-Men timeline shenanigan stuff with the Four Knights and their future children. And while that is something that's incredibly interesting to dive into, I'm waiting a bit before I can make a video actually explaining why this is the case or how this is even happening. But what I want to focus on right now for this video is the fact that the Grail Knights facing the Four Knights of the Apocalypse not only call them fakers, but literally compare them to the versions that they know when they grew up in whatever time or dimension that they're from. And so those differences allude to the potential future of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. Even the ages of all of these characters can be alluded to what they're like in the future in some way. And perhaps even potential deaths or horrible fates for the Four Knights in the future. So we're going to get into that in just a second. But before we dive into things, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. And if you want to see other stuff from me, go and check out my second channel, GW Comics, where I talk about comic books. Right now, DC is my primary focus, but I'm branching out as much as I possibly can to talk about other comics and even the MCU and the DCU movies and TV shows as they come out with news and trailers. So if you're interested in that stuff, go check it out. The link in the description and the title card. But let's just get right into the topic of this video in full force. So the Knights of the Holy Grail are in the present in Camelot on a mission from King Arthur himself. And when they first fought against the Four Knights, they called them fakers, and they tried to take them out. And that seemed to be their mission, with the idea of making them deformed right again. But with that being said, their reactions to the Four Knights is what makes things interesting. Let's start things off with Percival, as this one seems the less likely to be a super big deal and probably the most easy one to really look into outside of Gawain. His children kardeiz and lohengrin compare the Percival we have been following with their father in the future. Also, they probably don't even know that they're in the past at this point. But they say that this version wasn't as much of a, I would say, goofy goober and just careless, super peaceful whatever guy as Percival is and has been throughout the course of the story. Doesn't seem to be much of a super goofy, lackadaisical guy. And so that could make us believe that now that Percival has confirmed that Anne and Nazians are pregnant, and now we're seeing the 25-year-old versions of these characters as full-grown adults and older than Percival at this point, we can assume that becoming a father to two children at the same time with two different women most likely got our boy Percival to mature a lot more. Yeah, Percival does take things seriously, especially in specific situations, but he's still, as I said, a goofy goober. He's not super serious, and he likes to just goof around and just have fun still. He still has that happy-go-lucky mentality when he was 16, before his death and everything. But based off of their interactions, it seems that the Percival that they know of that helped raise them is a lot more serious and takes things a lot more at face value, for all we know. But for all we know, with Percival being a fully grown adult, he'll probably look a lot more chiseled and serious. But I guess he'll still have that goofy nature, maybe with just being alone with Anne and Nazians, or when Lohengrin and Kar were children. That is a strong possibility. But obviously, Percival, there's not really much to dive into in terms of that. The hairstyle is obviously still the same growing up, even the hair color, so we can assume that that's not really a thing with how they brought it up. But they also talk about Gawain, how she basically humiliated them to a point, and they say that this person is the most in common with the Gawain that they know. So our Gawain and their Gawain are relatively similar, especially with being able to change her body size freely. So in that aspect, it seems to the other knights that Gawain is very similar to the Gawain that they know in the future, but the one to kind of push back on this is Gawain's adoptive daughter, llywarch, as she calls Gawain the invincible master of the sun, and just says how she wouldn't get all huge and small like that, and that she's the most amazing holy knight ever, and to not compare her mother to the Gawain, the faker, that they just saw right now. So, first of all, llywarch, I'm definitely pronouncing her name incredibly wrong and butchering it. But she has a lot of respect for Gawain, her mother. But the interesting thing is that she is the adoptive daughter of Gawain, meaning that Gawain didn't give birth, or even perhaps did the same thing that Merlin did and made a magic homunculus using her own body as the catalyst to create a child. Which means, for all we know, Gawain didn't even end up with anybody in the future. She might not have ended up with Balin in this timeline, like the last chapter was alluding to with how Gawain was talking about Balin. Or who knows, maybe in the future she is still into women and is with a woman and ended up adopting, because reasons obviously. Or she just didn't have anybody to be romantically involved with, and then saw llywarch as a child, maybe even a baby, after something happened and decided to raise her as her own, and thus developed the mother-daughter relationship, and llywarch just worshipping Gawain as the greatest holy knight ever, and by extension, the best mom ever. Though the interesting thing that I've seen brought up is llywarch's name. Apparently, she is the cousin of the husband of Morgan Le Fay in Arthurian legends, or at least in some versions of Arthurian legends. Meaning we could potentially be getting Morgan Le Fay in the future. People have been wondering where Morgan Le Fay is, Arthur's half-sister from Arthurian legend. I know we have Kath, but without Morgan Le Fay, strong possibility that we'll never get Mordred. But with a character of this specific name, it feels like Nakaba is teasing us with the introduction of Morgan Le Fay for all we know, and maybe she is the reason why the Holy Grail Knights are here in the first place. And with llywarch being here in the story, and being Gawain's adopted daughter in this one, who knows, things might be different. I'm not sure, but it'd be interesting if that was in fact the case. But yeah, when it comes to Gawain and Percival, not really much to talk about. Lancelot is the second to last one that I can talk a bit more about, because based off of what everybody has said, Lancelot was obviously the strongest and the one that literally had the most intensity, that had them all shaking in their boots, except for Galahad for the most part. Galahad was able to fight against him and push him back. And Galahad is also the youngest out of all of these knights, which shows that Lancelot and Guinevere, when they eventually get together, don't have a kid until 7 years from this current point in the story where the Four Knights of the Apocalypse are. So when Lancelot's 25 and Guinevere's 21, they're gonna have Galahad at some point, and then we have the rest of the knights that are already born or have been adopted by the other four knights in that future timeline. But what Galahad really says in regards to Lancelot is the fact that the Lancelot that he knows, his dad, is like 10 times stronger than the Lancelot that he fought right now in the present. Which shows us that despite Lancelot being probably the strongest in the verse right now, save for, well, Hawk, obviously, after Hawk one-shot Kath with no problems whatsoever, with just pure brute strength. The Lancelot in the future is a lot stronger than the Lancelot we have now, and he is the strongest man in the world at this point, at least until, like, Arthur gains the full power of Chaos back, then we'll see. But even then, Lancelot is going to be even more of an absolute monster than he is right now in the future. But here's the thing. Yeah, Galahad has met and seen and even potentially trained with his father as a child. But many people are bringing up the fact that when Guinevere was telling Lancelot about their futures together, after she gets to their early to mid-20s, when talking about Lancelot and her's potential future together, basically confirmed future together, she starts to break down and cry, perhaps alluding to Lancelot's inevitable death. And for that, the possibility could be that Lancelot, at the time where the Holy Grail Knights are all together as a group, with Galahad being the strongest in that group, taking after his dad, potentially Lancelot might be dead. And maybe that's why the Holy Grail Knights are the ones that are getting ready to face these fake Four Knights of the Apocalypse in whatever is deforming the world. Because look, if Lancelot is around in the future, and is 10 times stronger than the Lancelot we know now. And obviously Galahad is probably not as strong as his future dad for all we know. At least if he is alive, then yeah, it would kind of make sense for Lancelot to be dead for all of this entire mission being brought down to the Holy Grail Knights. Though you could also bring up the fact that the 4 Knights shouldn't be doing this because the 7 Deadly Sins are still around, and we saw how they dealt with Cath, but there was other stuff they wanted to do, and they all had their kingdoms to look after at the time. So you could kind of explain away all that for the time being. Plus, they only recently developed a pretty good plan to deal with Cath when they thought it was Arthur and all that. So I'll write that away for a second. But when it comes to Galahad, it's very possible that Lancelot might be dead in the future. It has only known his dad when he was a kid, and that's why he doesn't really care for Lancelot right now, because he's not as strong as his dad, and it also kind of helps to allude to the high power ceiling that Lancelot is at this point in time. But obviously that's all speculation. For all we know, Lancelot might still be alive, he might be comatose, he might be fighting some great evil by himself while the Holy Grail Knights do their own thing, for all we know. But the most interesting character to be brought up for the future comparisons is Tristan. The final Grail Knight that we meet is ysaye. His name is so hard to pronounce. Ysaye. I can't pronounce this name, goddamn. Whatever. Ysaye, I'm gonna say for now until I can fully pronounce the name correctly, refers to Tristan as Tristan the hero, but says that his grandfather was the one who was the most proficient with full counter when they were discussing how llywarch was fighting against Tristan and how Tristan rebounded with full counter. But not only that, another piece of information is that he has not seen anyone else from the goddess clan in his whole life, and he was shocked when he saw Tristan have goddess wings like him. That is crazy. And so this also makes him think, hey, maybe these guys aren't just regular pretenders making themselves to be the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. But how he described Tristan, someone else not having the wings and such, that legitimately makes things very weird. Because out of all the knights, Tristan's son doesn't seem to recognize Tristan whatsoever. He hasn't met anyone else with goddess wings or the blood of the goddess clan. And also, he says that Meliodas is the grandfather of Tristan. That's an interesting thing to think about, because I looked it up. There is a mention of a ysaye who is called the Ysaye the Sad in Arthurian legend. And the interesting thing about that is that he was born but was raised by a hermit after his father's death. And since the legend of Tristan and Isolde is essentially a tragedy in Arthurian legend, for all we know, some point in the future, Tristan and Isolde end up dying, and their son is raised by someone else, a hermit. Heck, for all we know, he could have been raised by Lancelot and Guinevere for a bit, and he grew up alongside Galahad. Maybe Gawain took him in. Maybe, who knows, maybe some other character that we potentially know of. Maybe the Druids raised him himself, and that's how he knows about the goddess clan and stuff like that. We don't know, but that is the most interesting thing right here. He doesn't recognize Tristan, he knows about full counter. He also refers to Meliodas, for all we know, as the grandfather of Tristan the hero, so that is interesting. Not only that, but Tristan having the moniker of the hero in this instance refers to Tristan having done something truly grand and heroic, and since he can't recognize his own father, he probably died and gained that whole moniker of being a true hero, for all we know. Making us think that there's going to be some massive fight, an event, some point in the future after his son's birth, where Tristan will eventually die. Who knows, Isolde may still be alive and still raise her son, but they probably have no pictures of Tristan or even the more adult-looking version of Tristan, and so his son grew up not knowing who his father was. But if both his parents are dead, for all we know, he has no idea what they look like. All he knows is that he is the son of Tristan, But for all we know, it could be a whole weird thing where Tristan is a hero, but there might be another Tristan that is called one of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, because Galahad calls them the children of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, the greatest heroes of Britannia. It's just very weird in the best way possible. Tristan has the most potential out of all this future speculation when it comes to the Holy Grail Knights. And I am so curious to see where that could lead if the Four Knights and the Grail Knights actually realize that they're basically both who they say they are and both heroes and stuff like that, and the Four Knights begin to somewhat know their futures at this point. Maybe that'll cause a bunch of deformities or whatever, and that's how it would end up leading to the Grail Knights creation. Who knows? But yeah, the Grail Knights allude to stuff in the future for the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, with I think Tristan being the most interesting one in terms of the glimpse of what his legacy is like in the future. We meet his son, obviously. He looks more like Meliodas than Tristan. It seems like Meliodas' genes skip a generation, but he still gets the goddess powers for some reason. But even still, he doesn't know his dad, seemingly, because he didn't recognize Tristan, and he refers to Tristan as Tristan the hero, and seemingly Meliodas as Tristan's grandfather. So there could be some timeline shenanigans, could be some weird hearsay of the history books muddling details, or, for all we know, it was a mistranslation. He meant to say his grand, as in great father, or his legendary father, or something like that, for all we know. But grandfather seems like something that feels kind of weird. It makes me believe that this is Tristan's grandson and not our Tristan's actual son. Could be the son of Tristan's son, for all we know. But that would also make the timeline so weird. Because now, at the end of all this, we also know the timeline of when the Four Knights are going to have their kids. Percival's kids are 25 at this point. They're the oldest of the group. Then we have llywarch, who is 23. She was adopted by Gawain, which means within two and a half to 3 years from this point in the story, where Anna and Nazians are pregnant, Gawain will find her and adopt her, which means Gawain will end up being a mother as well by that aspect. Then Ysaye a year after that. So 3 to 4 years after the current point in the story we are at right now, we are going to get Tristan and Isolde's son. And lastly, we have Galahad, who is 18, who will be born 7 years from now. He is the youngest of the group. And this also basically lets us know that by the time Gawain is 21 and Lancelot is 25, that is when they will be together and eventually have their kid. So that is something. 7 to 8 years from now is when Galahad will be born. So we now have a timeline of when everyone's going to be fully together with somebody or is going to end up having a kid, and we have a clear timeline for the next stretch of perhaps a decade, alluding to potentially gruesome fates or great hardships for the future of this story. As the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, while the protagonist of this story could end up having a passing of the baton moment, leading into the next generation for either another title or the continuation of Four Knights of the Apocalypse, for all we know. That could be something that'll happen, but I believe the story will probably end with the Four Knights of the Apocalypse still as the main characters. Just might have some weird wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nonsense going on, for all we know. Either way, that's the video. That's all of my speculations on what these characters are and what exactly might be going on with the future of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse, their families, and perhaps their fates. Because for all we know, Gawain and Percival are 100% still alive in the future, for all we know, based on how they've been talked about, and how Galahad refers to Lancelot, at least in that instance, as the past tense. Lancelot might actually be dead, and with how we hear about Tristan seems like he's most likely dead. So that's something to really think about going into the future. Then again, Gawain was also referred to in the past tense this chapter, so she could also be dead. For all we know, Percival, since he's a life spirit, he's probably the only one of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse still alive in the future. Which, when it comes to a lot of protagonist stories in Next Generation, a lot of times the main protagonist tends to be of the previous story tends to be the last one standing, like 80% of the time in a future timeline when there's a Next Generation type deal. So that is something that happens. Either way, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below on what you think of the Holy Grail Knights and what they can allude to for the future of our main characters going forward. Do you like this twist? Do you think this will be good, or do you think this will just end up being some really bad decision that'll bite Nakaba in the ass very quickly. But yeah, that's all I have to say about the subject for today. Let me know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell for updates on future videos, and hype it up to show that you guys enjoy what I make on the channel and shows you want to see more. And if you want to support the channel more directly, either become a channel member by clicking the join button down below, or check out my Patreon, link in the description, where I have some limbo videos, stuff that I haven't posted in public. It's going to be out there by the time this video is out for at least the first 1 or 2 videos. That will be going out on that Patreon for you guys to enjoy privately, until I eventually figure out when I'll continue those videos or even post them. So you guys will get some nice goodies off of that. And even early access to some other videos that I plan to do in the future. But if you can't do that, just liking, subscribing, and sharing the video and hyping it up more than helps the channel immensely. But with all that said and done, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have an awesome day.